Welcome to another Perspectives podcast. It's me, the man himself. I'm here with Chase, Mr. Chase Brown. How you doing, sir?
Dude, I'm doing really good, man.
You doing good?
It was a long day at work today.
Yeah.
Kind of day before Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I feel like that's when it's either going to be super busy or it's not going to be busy at all.
Exactly. But today was one of those busy days.
Yeah.
So was able to get through it. But how are you doing, man?
I'm good, man. I just had a nice long drive back from Tyler, Texas, but I'm here because, this is what we do. So
yeah, and we got a special guy on the podcast
We
today.
do have a special guy on the podcast. Every time, most of the time when we're on the podcast, we have someone special. And today we have Mr. David Miranda. How you doing, sir?
Doing great. Great to be here with you guys.
Yeah, thank you for coming in. I know Chase has been definitely trying to work it out to where we can have you on, and you're here. So thank you for taking the time to be here. So
yeah, man.
Well, thanks for the invite. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, man. So just so people can get to know you a little bit, how about you just introduce yourself? Maybe, your favorite ice cream flavor, something like that.
Good.
I don't know.
Well, Brahms is always the way to go. I grew up in East Texas, so it's cheap and does the job.
There we go.
So, yeah.
So good. So how long have you been living in the Dallas area? How's family, everything like that?
So I've been living here in Dallas for about 15 years, and I went to Dallas Baptist University.
Yep.
That's the reason I moved here. I'm from Sulphur Springs, and so it's an hour and 30 minutes east. It used to be the dairy capital of the world. And so we have a huge cow in front of our high school. And so that's our claim to fame. Actually, there's two of them, so. But yeah, so then I came here 15 years ago, went to school, and I just stayed in Dallas.
Yeah, so what do you do now?
So I currently pastor a church in downtown Dallas. It's called West End Church.
Okay.
And we meet outdoors with the homeless.
Wow.
We have a lot of college students that come out and volunteer, and they've become members. They've graduated and they've stayed. So we've been doing that for about 10 years.
Wow.
Going out to the downtown area.
Yeah.
And so the place where we meet is really interesting. It's if you think of the tallest building in Dallas, it's ironic. It's like a dichotomy because you get all the wealth in Dallas. It's called the Bank of America Tower. But then at the base is where we're at because we're ministering to the homeless, to those who are addicted with substances. So it's a great irony there that all the wealth in Dallas, and then at its core, at its foundation, you have all the poverty.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's so good, and we'll definitely get into everything that that all y'all are doing at West End a little bit later because we've had the opportunity, for Perspectives, be able to come out there, partner with y'all, be able to serve that community. But yeah, thinking about other things in your personal life. Have a beautiful wife, Crystal.
Just got married.
Congratulations.
A year ago. And so December 12th will be our anniversary.
There we go.
And so it's been going great. We moved into a house this week.
Yeah.
Congratulations again.
Moving on up, man. Moving on up.
Life. It's crazy.
I know what's happening.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, man.
So usually, whenever we have people come on, just so people can get a little bit more familiar with you in terms of your walk, can you give us a brief about your testimony? Talk to us about your testimony.
Yeah. So part of my testimony goes back to Sulphur Springs, where I'm from. There's 15,000 people in that town. I went to a small church, around 100 people. And when you go to a small church, it's easy for you to feel utilized. They want you to help out with youth. They want you to help out with preaching or leading worship, whatever. The opportunities are there. But when I came to Dallas, it was a little bit different. It's a bigger pond, right? There's a lot more people. Churches are bigger, and for whatever reason, it was hard for me to plug into a church. I would go to church. I would sit in the balcony by myself in the pew, and that's how I did church for a while I was at DBU.
Yeah.
And I grew stagnant in my faith. I knew that God wanted to use me. I knew that I had potential. I just didn't know how or where to use it. And so that's kind of part of my story too, that knowing that God wants to use me, but just not knowing how or where. Yeah. And so that's where West End became this open door, this great platform for me to serve. And I feel like while we minister to the homeless, the biggest vision that I have is to empower the Christian, the believer, to be mobilized. Yeah. You know, we have a great mission field here in Dallas. And so we have a lot of believers that don't know how or where to use their faith. Yeah. And so that's what I want to do, is to create that platform for them to serve.
Yeah, and I think it's so good because I think one thing, it's so amazing. How old were you whenever you started up West End?
So I was 21.
Wow.
Yeah.
21.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And so it's crazy because I feel like so much of our like culture and kind of young adults nowadays just tries to run away from responsibility as much as possible. And one of the things that the Lord's called us to is to take on that responsibility. And often, even in the Word, you see Him giving either amazing visions or responsibility to young people. Like you see it with Joseph, for instance. Right. Yeah. Like even Jesus and his calling, like he was only 30 at the time when he started his ministry, but he was a lot younger whenever he started to correct a lot of the teachers within the church. And so it's amazing, one, that you were able to walk in obedience during that time at a young age and be able to take on that responsibility, and then just honestly just seek out the opportunity to serve the community rather than staying complacent. Because so I feel like so many people can relate, and I know I've had seasons of life where I can relate that, you know, I'm at this huge church, you know, at the time Gateway, where there's all these amazing things going on, and I feel like I have this potential God's put inside me, these gifts, but I don't really know where to use them. And so oftentimes I don't think the opportunity to use those things is just going to come up. And so it's something you have to intentionally pursue. And then from there, the Lord is going to partner with you in that pursuit and that effort to really like love on people and give Him glory. Right. And so,
yeah, I mean, I'm still stuck on the fact that you said you started that when you were 21. I mean, how does a 21-year-old, I guess, have enough confidence to even approach something like that?
Sure, yeah. And then part of my background, too, is that I'm Hispanic. And so I went to a Hispanic church where Spanish was spoken the whole time. And so for me, God spoke Spanish. I didn't know. I didn't know how to pray. Yes. Yeah. See, I didn't know how to pray in English once I came to college. Wow. And so going out to West End, going out to the streets, I had to adapt and learn how to pray, and then how to preach, how to share the gospel, how to relearn the verses that I knew verbatim in Spanish, but I had to translate them and get to relearn Scripture. Yeah. So definitely God's hand was in that. I remember one day I was at Urban Outfitters, and I know, so hip, right?
Yeah, super hip.
I was a hipster back then, But yeah, so I walk into this place, and I already know what I'm going to get. I had some sunglasses that I had lost, and I'm walking in, and the guy that was folding clothes, he stops me and he says, "Hey, I want to ask you a question." And I said, "Sure." He says, "What religion are you?" And I said, "I'm a Christian, if that's what you're asking." And he said, "I thought so." And I was like, "How did you know?" And he said, "Well, God told me that you're going to be a preacher, and you're going to love a lot of people, and you're going to do it well." And I said, "How do you know?" He said, "God just told me." And so I had this idea that I was going to run into the store and just get these sunglasses and run out. And part of my background too is that I grew up Baptist, so I'm skeptical when it comes to
spiritual gifts, everything.
And so. And so part of that, I just didn't know how to respond to that. But for whatever reason, I just felt God's love in that moment. And it was just overwhelming. And I immediately called my dad and I say, "I don't really know what this means, but I feel God's love, and He's confirming what this person is saying." And shortly, that was within the time that I had started going to West End. Yeah, and so I started feeling this call to not only share the gospel with people, but to build a community around them and to give them a home. to remove that name, that identifier of homelessness, give them a home that it's even metaphysical, but it's a place that they can have a dwelling, with us and with God.
Exactly. Fellowship and being able to be like in the Lord's presence. Because that's something that I think is so good. And I mean, it's obviously a part of like your testimony and the affirmation of your calling is the Lord being able to speak through fellowship and through other people. And that's something that like I feel like so often in like this American pursuit of this wondrous thing called calling, we think we almost have to stumble across it like ourselves and figure out what it is ourselves, to whereas if we were open to really receiving the Lord's affirmation in so many different ways, whether it be his audible voice, whether it be fellowship, whether it be like reading in his actual word, like I feel like we would hear the Lord a lot clearer. And I mean, obviously things like distractions come into that as well.
Right.
Since we have a lot of those here. But it's so cool that like through fellowship and through a random person that he was able to affirm that. And even like the boldness that that person had to have
Step out.
thinking about it.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And so kind of going on kind of past that, after going through that season, moving to DBU or moving to Dallas for DBU, everything like that. What does life kind of looked like post DBU, post graduation, everything like that?
Yeah. So right after college, I wanted to go and do missions.
Yeah.
And so the opportunity to do missions arose, and I ended up going to Spain for 6 months. And I loved Spain. I loved being there, and I always wanted to go back. And so that's also part of my story too. That they even offered me fully funded support, for another 6 months to stay there. But that was around the time when this whole West End calling and everything started happening. And so God slowly, I know that my desire was to be in Spain and to do Europe and things like that, but slowly God showed me that he needed me in my own town, in my own place, in my own state. So he confirms that time and time again. People coming to Christ, people being mobilized to missions, feeling empowered, understanding their calling, and so those are small confirmations that God gives me. Even though my plan was to go back to Spain and to continue doing foreign mission, he called me for a domestic stay currently.
Amen. And that's so cool because I feel like what you were feeling as far as like significantly feeling in that time of like the burden at home and the needs that are here, I feel like that's something that not a lot of believers who are heavily involved with missions kind of feel. We feel almost this heavier burden and care for like the international communities rather than our home community. And one of the ideas that like I'm kind of exploring through right now is there must be a meaning behind us having a home and us having more of a sedentary lifestyle rather than a nomadic lifestyle, kind of like in our current generation. But with that, I think there's a meaning and a significance behind why God has us call a certain place home and why he has us spend the most amount of our time in a specific place. And I think that might be because that's where we're called to invest the most amount of like our effort and everything like that. To where often with missions, we get that flipped.
Right.
Where at home, we just kind of coast.
Sure. Yeah.
Go through the motions.
Yeah.
Get through the week just to the weekend. And then when we go on, these trips, that's when we're just trying to like go all out.
Right. Yeah.
And I think we almost might, I don't want to say we have it backwards, but definitely like going towards one of the things the Lord was able to teach you, that intention of, that mission, it's a very cliche term, but that missions lifestyle is something we need to have at home as well.
Definitely.
And so that's so cool that something that kind of needs to be and I think the Lord is correcting in missions, is something that you've been able to live through and being able to go with that.
Yeah, I mean, kind of going off of what you said, I wonder if it's the fact that we go to work. You know, people have, kids that have soccer games, and I wonder if those type of daily things kind of, in a sense, almost puts us in a comfort level to where we're just like, we have all these different routines that are already going on. I don't know if you want to kind of speak towards that.
I will say this though: the first time I ever fed a homeless person or gave them clothing was on my mission trip.
Wow.
So when I was in Spain, we did a training in Paris, and so in Sulphur Springs there are no homeless. There might be one or two that are random. They're scarce. It's a small rural town, but the first opportunity I had was in Paris, and so we were in our hotel, and on our way to the church, we would walk there. And so the first day we were there, we saw this homeless person. And on the second day, we got free breakfast at our hotel. And so I just got a bunch of stuff for him, and I knew that he was going to be there when I was walking to church. And so one of the missionaries that I was with, they took notice of that. Yeah. And she gave me her boots. And she said, hey, if you find anybody on your way, go ahead and give them these boots. And so I feel like it was just this, while yes, I was solely determined to be on mission, also having a missionary there, confirming that call and to also helping empower what God was already doing. Yeah. So I think it's important for us to have those elements in our lives, and also be thinking when we do go on foreign mission trips, how can I apply this at home? Or how can I equip and empower or give ideas to the people that I'm with, that what they can do back home.
Yep, and we're trying to do that with the resource that we're developing right now.
I mean, it's so funny. It reminds me of, I'll make it super short. One time I was in college, and I felt like I was supposed to go bless a guy. He was in front of a QT. My heart was pounding so fast. Like, I don't know if I was about to pass out or what, but it just kind of exemplifies how sometimes we're not used to doing that here. But I think that same year I was planning on going on a mission trip. But at home where I was so afraid to approach that guy. Yeah. My heart was just pounding, just rapidly, So.
Yeah, and something I want to bring up just before we move on to kind of the next topic is going to the kind of question that you had about habits. David Crowder has a book, Praise Habit, if I remember the name of it correctly. In that, he explores this idea that habits, if they go unchecked, and we can see this in real life and our spiritual life, if habits go unchecked, we grow increasingly dead and cold with those habits, and the meaning gets sucked out of them because we just become robots at that point. Right. And so one of the things that he advises in terms of spiritual habits and disciplines is getting things changed up. Well, one, having the self-awareness in your relationship with the Father to be able to realize whenever things are losing their significance and losing their meaning, and then in that point being willing to change it up a little bit. Whether it's where you're reading in the Word, whether it's where you're reading in terms of an actual place, whether it's the time, whether it's the method, all these things. And so I think that's something that is good, that kind of in a missions lifestyle, we get out of that habit and we make it an intention to get out of that habit. To whereas in life, so often we're going to the same job every day for however many years. Yeah. So we lose that ability and that intention. And so kind of going on to the next part of your life. So the Lord's called you to missions. You have this great experience in Spain, and you come back home. So right now you're working over at Texas Baptist. So shout out them.
Yeah, shout out to Texas Baptist.
They're amazing.
Shout out to them.
Shout out Jim Reed.
Yes, sir.
Love that guy.
He's got jokes.
Yeah.
He's got jokes. Yeah.
So what was the season like between kind of returning home from Spain and then starting at the Texas Baptist?
Yeah. So part of my story too is I planted this church really out of conviction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I knew that's what God wanted me to do. I knew the need was there, but being a millennial. I didn't want to report to anybody. I
Yep.
knew I had it down. I could figure it out on my own, and so it ended up with me just really pastoring this church without really any partnerships.
Yeah.
And slowly, God has revealed that to me, like how important having a partner or multiple partners is. You know, and so Texas Baptist has been able to walk alongside me in that. And so a few years ago, I connected with them.
Cool.
They have a church planning program, and we became an affiliate of them. Cool. And through that, I was able to get mentorship. I was able to get peers that really understood the calling. You know, they too were ministers. They've gone through it, and so I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't siloed out. You know, and so that was really important for me as well.
Yeah, so good. And so I think this would be a cool perspective. So because now you're in missions full time, you're able to travel around, you're able to organize a lot of things, missions, not just trips, but these initiatives, really be able to serve these people around the world. So I'll leave it kind of open to you on however you'd like to answer this. So what do you think your perspective was like on missions going into your role at the Texas Baptist, and how has the Lord been able to like change your perspective on missions and really been able to grow you in that?
Yeah, I think what I'm doing currently at Texas Baptist is I work for the missionary adoption program.
Yeah.
And so this is a new initiative that we've adopted. So what we do is that we fund missionaries across the world. So we have missionaries in Brazil, Peru, Spain, Mexico, Myanmar, just all over West Africa. And so I know it takes a lot of funds to fund a missionary from the States and to take them and send them across overseas, you know, and for them to contextualize, learn the language. And so we kind of created this program where we find a local church and we partner with them 50-50. And so then they vet a local missionary. And so we're able to provide for them, a stipend for them to live on, and also to just go out and live out the gospel.
Yep.
And so we also have missionaries in the Amazon, so places that typically an American missionary might not be able to reach. So it's been life-changing too, to kind of take a new perspective of how a lot of times we feel like we might not be able to go. You know, God does call us to go, and it's important for us to go. But also, if there are limitations in our life, He also provides these other opportunities for us to be able to give and to be able to serve God through that. So
Yeah, giving such a important way for us, kind of like you mentioned, to really partner with, you know, the people that are going now, because not every single one of us can go, obviously. You said something, and I was already thinking about the question. So what is that? This doesn't really have to do anything with this, but I wanted you to speak a little bit about provision. You know, you coming to know God as a provider in different aspects of your life as you're doing all these different things with missions or even just the church. If you could speak about that a little bit.
yeah, so it's interesting. I just preached on Sunday on John 6, where Jesus feeds the 5,000.
Okay.
And so it's a good question, and kind of ties into to my ministry too. When I first stepped foot in West End, I was 21, really a college student, broke. How was I going to feed people? And so the same question that Jesus asked Philip, you know, what are we going to do? Right. So Philip starts to calculate, do the math. He says it's going to take 200 denarii to feed all these people, which is 6 months worth of wage. So he would have had to work 6 months to feed the 5,000 people that were there. Versus Andrew, who brings this kid, with the 5 loaves and 2 fish.
Yeah.
And so you see the difference between being calculating and then also walking on faith. People could have made fun of Andrew, but really he still kind of stepped up and said, here you go, God, this is what I have. So I know that you can multiply it.
Yeah.
So it's not about what we have or what we possess, but whose hands we put it in. So these are my gifts. God, here you take them, you multiply them. The beauty in that same narrative is that Jesus, whenever he gives thanks, right before that, he tells the people to sit down, to lay down. And the Bible says in John that there was a lot of grass there. So John paints these pictures of, going back to the Old Testament. So we remember in Psalm 23, where he says, lay down in green he will make us lay down. Wow. And the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want.
Wow.
And so, again, he's kind of painting this picture of how Jesus is the shepherd, that he's going to take care of us, even when we don't have enough, when we can't. He's going to provide. And so he gives thanks, he multiplies it, and then instead of immediately giving it to the people, he gives it to the disciples. And the disciples then are empowered, even in their lack of faith, to go out and give to the hungry, to the needy. And I've seen that firsthand in my life, where I showed up with nothing. And this Sunday, in fact, we were able to provide 500 meals.
Wow.
I didn't bring a single plate. I didn't bring a single fork. It was just God's provision of getting all these people mobilized. And I know there's a lot of logistics and things like that went into it, but God prepared the hearts for people to come in. And I've seen that every Sunday after Sunday. We usually feed around 250 people per week. And again, that's really just God doing it. So
Yeah, and it's so good because like us being able to see that when we're down there is so good, and being able to see just like the communal generosity the Father's been able to really build in all the people that have served down there. Because I mean, there's people from all walks of life that go down to serve at Weston, to be able to serve that community down there, and being able to come together almost like the disciples in Acts, as the early church, being able to just come together and just share what we have.
And the beauty of it too is that people want to serve. They want to help.
Yeah.
A lot of times they don't know how or where.
Yeah.
And we go back to that same, my life mission is to create these platforms for people.
Yeah.
And so if Weston has become this platform for this time, but I know that in a different season, God's going to prepare another platform for us to create. And so that's really how I feel like my brain operates, like how one of my giftings, or I think it's my gifting, strategizing, but to create new opportunities for people to serve God and live out their calling.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's good, because I mean, that kind of relates to us. Like whenever, like we really felt the calling to like start up Perspectives was in college. We just kept hearing of all these friends and all these people just say, oh, like, I've always wanted to go on a mission trip. I just don't know where. I don't know who with. I don't have the money. Like all these excuses, which like for, a college kid at that time, can be reasonable excuses. But whenever you say them year after year after year, like it just, one of the things that comes up is you question like, okay, like, do you really want to do this? Or are you just saying it just as virtue signaling or things like that? And so from there, one of the things like we had a genuine heart for is just to be able to provide opportunities for these people, because we've been able to travel around. Our lives have been changed by missions and being able to serve like both internationally and here. And we've been able to grow like this amazing network to be able to have these opportunities for people to be able to serve. And so then from there, we can really like almost, not to say that like we're God and like we're testing people, but just put the opportunity in front of them. Just be like, hey, like, are you going to bear fruit in this situation or not? So then from there, they have the opportunity to really reflect on their faith to see, is this something that they genuinely care about or not? Yeah. And so I think it's so cool that like both of us kind of started this up. with really just wanting to provide these opportunities to people. Because, I really do think our generation does care about making a difference. The percentage of it, whether it's just verbal or actual, to be real,
that's where it usually comes in.
I don't think any of us know. And so all we can do is just create these opportunities, as you're saying, to find out.
Go ahead. Sorry.
A couple of things on that. So as millennials, we have an advantage because we like to do things in community. So we're already kind of wired that way to do things in community. And in our church planning strategy at Texas Baptist, we, instead of planning as an individual, we want to start planning as a team.
So good.
And so I've kind of learned that through in my time. So always, I feel like you have both builders and maintainers. And so I feel like I'm wired to be a builder. I love creating new things. But I also need to realize that my forte is not to maintain, So the importance of having that collaboration. And then some people don't like to build. They just like to really have a relational component with people. And so I think that that's so important. And the second thing is that there's this book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Shout out. Royalties. That book kind of helps you shape your perspective on things. And there's two types of people, is what they say. Is that there's a people that think I can't make that happen, so I'm not going to do that. And then there's another group of people that their mentality is, how can I make it happen? And so I think it's important for us to kind of have that second mentality of God's calling me. This is the conviction that I have. How can I utilize what's around me as currency for me to go on mission and to live out my calling?
It seems like it's so funny. Earlier today, I was thinking about all these random things that I usually don't even think about, but now it's starting to make sense why, especially with this next question. You being someone who, it seems like, serving has been a really big part of your life with just all these different opportunities and just being a pastor. You're really serving people. You're giving people of your life. So earlier today, I was kind of just in my own mind thinking about how, as believers, we sometimes can think serving is what kind of puts us in relationship with God, in a sense, right? Or because I'm doing all these outreaches, I'm going on these mission trips, then I'm cool with God, type of deal. Instead of knowing that I'm cool with God, so then I'm doing all these different things. So if you can kind of speak to that a little bit.
I'll speak to both of them. As far as I think it's important for us to know that we don't do works to gain salvation.
Exactly.
But I do believe that work is good. Like even in the garden, God
and I talked about it the last time we were together.
It's awesome. That even before the fall, God was already, telling Adam to do different things because he wants us to have communion with him. He wants us to use our love languages with him. Here's a little tidbit: is that in Genesis we see this picture of Adam dwelling with God in the garden, and so while they're dwelling together, Adam decides to sin, and sin removes him from that garden. He doesn't have communion with God anymore. Sin creates the separation. But God in his love, he finds a way for man to dwell with him once again. So God picks these people, the Israelites, and he tells them to build this temple, right? While they were in the wilderness, he tells them to build a tabernacle. And in that place, people can go in, a high priest can go in, have a sacrifice, and have fellowship with God. And throughout time, for a long time, the Israelites were doing that. But then in John, we see Jesus coming in, and the Bible says that he dwelled among us. And that verb is he tabernacled among us. And what we see is that Jesus becomes this dwelling place for us because Jesus wasn't necessarily inside the temple all the time, just sitting there. Jesus was walking with the poor, the sinners, the Samaritans, who the Jews called half-breeds or dogs. We see he was walking with the tax collectors, which was a euphemism for sinner. And so wherever he went, he created this space of being in communion with God. John chapter 2, we see that Jesus says, destroy this temple and I will build it back up in 3 days.
Yeah.
What he's saying there is that I am going to be this place, this new place that you can have relationship with God. And so now as Christians, we have that same task, right? To wherever we go, we ought to resemble Christ. We ought to exemplify, to express who Jesus is. So what Jesus did is what we ought to do, is that we create this opportunity for people to have relationship with God.
Good.
So at work, I know we do the day-to-day, the mundane, but yet our task, our responsibility too, is to express God and His character. And again, not to be saved, but as we do this, we gain the joy of being in fellowship with God.
Yeah. Jeez.
That was good.
I think we can almost just end it right there.
You just went through the Bible. If you didn't
Goodness,
catch
man.
that was really good.
Goodness, man. Like, that's, point right there.
Yeah.
Amazing, dude.
No, I mean, there's a verse in, is it Ephesians 2 or Philippians 2, 1 to 2? It says, it's God who works in us both to will and to do according to His good pleasure.
Amen.
And I really feel like it speaks to that part of us. Obviously, you're not working for your salvation or anything, but the fact that you have this joy within you, just causes you to freely give of your life.
Amen.
To be able to lay it down and do all these different things. So, yeah.
Damn, so good.
Yeah, it's important to understand the implications of the gospel, right? So the Bible tells us to love the poor. But for a long time as a believer, again, it wasn't until I went on that first mission trip that I cared for a homeless person.
Yeah.
Or it wasn't until I started West End Church that I invited a homeless person to church with me.
Yeah.
So understanding the implications of the gospel is really important. And I think when we understand God's love for us, if I can go into this really quick story. When we first started going to West End, my responsibility was to go and find people and then bring them to the subway where we were meeting. And so as I was walking down these streets, again, being in a place where I was stagnant in my faith because I was in that balcony by myself, not serving God, not having, not being utilized in my potential. As I was walking in these streets now, I felt that God was seeking me out. The way I was seeking these people to come in and to have a meal with me, I also felt that God was seeking me out in those same moments.
Yeah.
So my mercy that I have on people is an expression of God's mercy on me. And so God reveals that to you as you serve Him.
Yeah.
And it's a blessing to serve Him.
Yeah, and it's so good because I think so often, I think that is a tangible and like abstract realization of it's more blessed to give than to receive. Like both from the actual, like physically, you giving and then you receiving in the like abstract and idea sense of you coming to understand the truth of the Father's love for you more and the truth in Jesus' sacrifice for you. And it's something that the more and more we act that out, I think the more and more that the Spirit is able to reveal to us, like, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Right.
And even on a higher level. And so it's amazing. And obviously we don't just serve just to get that out of it, but more just for God to be able to delight in us and for us to be obedient to the Lord. But at the same time, like, I think God is able to use almost any. Actually, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. This is a thought I just had, both of y'all. Because God's able to almost use any motivation to be able to twist that for good in His glory. Because Paul talks about no matter what the purpose is behind someone preaching the gospel, it's good that someone preaches the gospel. I think it's in Philippians. I can't remember. And so from there, almost maybe even serving and loving others could be viewed in the same way, to where that's a physical expression of the gospel. And so from there, like, even if like someone's motivation is bad in the time, God is still able to twist that for good and still able to show them a further understanding of the gospel and hopes from there to be able to then have them repent from that negative motivation, be able to then turn back to the Father and really be able to pursue things purely. So, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important too to kind of like piggybacking off what you said.
Yeah.
It's important too to realize that we're all different, right? We shouldn't chase somebody else's calling,
Yeah.
right? The Bible, I think there's an acronym, APEST, which is like there was shepherds, teachers, prophets, whatever.
Apostles, all that.
Yeah. And so like it's important for us to realize that not all we don't encapsulate all those giftings.
Yeah.
And so it's important for us to again be in community. And I currently I am blessed when I see a shepherd shepherding somebody.
Yeah.
I'm blessed when I see a teacher teaching. You know, and it removes that burden from me, you know, like that I know that that's not me, right?
Because we can be so tempted to think like we're people's like saviors, and like we can't be that because we're not all encompassing like Jesus was.
Right.
Goodness, dang.
And so it frees you. It's liberating, and it creates that sense of brotherhood or you know, a stronger community when you're seeing somebody doing something well that you need their help with. We're all in this together.
Yeah,
So,
and people who are really involved with missions, I feel like are often subject to this obligation of needing to like serve people, and that people need them rather than needing Jesus. Like I know I've been with that a lot. Like for example, like down in Costa Rica is like that's my country. That's one of them that I love, and I love the people down there.
Pura vida.
For vida, man. And so for that, like there's been so many times where I felt guilty being back here rather than being down there because I feel like they need me. Like I'm tempted to think that they need me rather than just needing the presence of God and needing the Holy Spirit to be able to work through the people there. And so I think even understanding like what you just said can be so freeing for people who are in missions that fall to that like lie of the enemy that it's not that the people need you, it's that the people need Jesus. And sometimes you could be the vessel that God uses to be able to bring that, or sometimes like just being able to send money down to missionaries there is what's needed.
Yeah.
And so it's amazing, man.
Yeah, I feel like some people are probably gonna get saved after listening to this podcast. Like,
Let's hope so.
For real, this is really good. Kind of like what Chase was talking about, missions. We know you've mentioned going to different places. What are some of the countries you've been to, and what have you learned? You know, just from your own observations from being in all these different places.
Yeah. So the last place that I went to was Mexico City.
Yeah.
And what we did is that we mobilized a team that was supposed to go to Haiti. They were supposed to it was a team of nurses. Yeah. There was about 10 people that went on this trip. Haiti became this difficult place for Americans to travel to. Yeah. And so the government advised us not to go there. And so they called me up. I speak Spanish, so I'm going to be their translator. And so we go to Mexico City and we have these clinics. What was awesome was that we worked together with the local churches there. And so there was a missionary that connected us and did most of the logistics. But a lot of these local churches were in people's homes.
Yeah.
You know, so we hosted clinics inside people's homes. And so the beauty of that was that as they opened their own home, it was a place for them to be able to love and serve people.
Yeah.
And so it was awesome to see how easy it can be for us to show people Christ just by opening our homes to them. Yeah. That's a message we can take and bring back to the States.
Exactly, because I mean, a lot of us have homes, apartments, anything like that here, and so simply the act of like welcoming people in.
Yeah, I feel like we always, I guess maybe it's just me. I say this every time, but I always love those stories that you're like, man, this really just stuck with me. Do you have any stories like that where God just did something? You're like, wow. You know, I really love those kind of stories.
Maybe on that trip.
Yeah.
So we were having a clinic on one of the days. I think it was the third day we were there. And because I speak Spanish and because of my background in West End, I was walking around different parks and trying to find people that would come and attend these clinics. And I'm at this park and I see this woman who is well-to-do. She seems like she's got it figured out. Her child is 9 years old. She's playing on the playground. And I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'll just go invite her and see what happens. Okay. And so I walk up to her and I tell her about the clinic. She says, no, she's fine. And I look at her, and when I look at her, she just begins bawling. She's just crying and crying and crying. Her husband's abusive. He had just kicked her out. She had nowhere to go. And she ended up at that park. So how, we assumed that we were going to go there for a clinic or whatever, but really God had prepared something completely different. Wow. This woman who didn't really need medicine, but she needed Christ. Yep. Right. And so I asked her to come with me, and I invited the pastor and his wife to come. And we met at a restaurant there, and she finally had a place. She had a place where she had this motherly figure that she didn't have before, right? Her mom was also abusive, and I think that's how she ended up in this relationship. Yep. She was just accustomed to this verbal abuse, and she said that the only times her husband ever came back home was to give her food, which a lot of times he brought her rotten food. Like he would tell her that this is all you're worth. Right. And so here we come from all the way from the States to find this woman in a park and this beautiful child that she has, and just the neglect, the hurt, the pain that they were feeling. But God, just finds a way to find us no matter where we're at. So.
Yeah. And I think it's so good because one of the questions that often comes up in regards to missions is, wouldn't it just be better for you to send money there or things like that, rather than wasting money on a plane ticket and wasting money for you to go down there? And one of the stories that one of my cousins shares that kind of relates to this, she went down to Peru, and in one of the outreaches down there, a woman goes up to him and asks him, oh, wait, are you from America? And my cousin is just like, yeah, from America, from Texas, yeehaw. Yes. And the woman is like, why are you down here? And she's like, well, we came to here to just talk about Jesus, answer people's questions, everything like that, share our testimonies of what Jesus has done in our life. And the woman is just like you would come all the way down here just for us, right? You would spend that money just for us. And in that time she was able to articulate, because for us, we value y'all Peruvians in that instance enough to spend our money to come down there. Right. But then she was able to articulate, but here's the thing, the Father infinitely more values y'all. Amen. More than what we did, to where he was where he paid the price to sacrifice his son for your eternity. Yeah. And so it's amazing in that instance in Mexico, to where that might not even have been possible if the extra fellowship that was down there in that time wasn't there. They probably wouldn't have been able to go to that park. Right. They'd have been busy doing other things, and the person that the Lord had called to go to that woman wouldn't have been there.
Yeah. Well, the currency of the kingdom is love, not U.S. dollars or money, right? Yeah. That's our currency a lot of times. Yeah. But God operates on a different system than we do.
Exactly. And our allegiance, first off, should be to the kingdom of the Lord, rather than America or Mexico, Costa Rica, anything like that. And so often, we get distracted by just kind of worldly things, right? And especially here in America, because we have an abundance of it, and it's crazy.
Yeah, someone's really gonna get saved listening to this. I'm over here laughing. I shake my head when I'm like, wow. So I'm just shaking my head the whole time. But I love the fact that you were just there, just looking for somebody right? You didn't have the wind didn't blow you over there. The birds didn't line up in a straight line towards somebody. You just walked in faith, and God led you to the right person, even without you already knowing, until that moment happened.
Exactly. And I think that kind of goes into like the next thing that like we're really wanting to talk about is, and we've talked about it a good amount, kind of in the first part of this podcast, is one of the things that the Lord's really been able to allow you to walk in obedience in is being able to serve while you're at home and the importance of serving while you're at home.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we talked about before the podcast is so many people in missions kind of have almost the opposite of what you're doing, to where whenever they're on mission, they're getting after it. They're doing all these amazing things, like really just stepping out in faith to the Lord, to whereas when they're at home, they're just chilling, not really doing anything. To whereas you, the Lord's really been able to give you a proper balance of, going on these trips, walking in obedience and really caring for those people, but as well, when you're at home, having that same focus in obedience. And so I'd love just to open it up to you to talk about like maybe how the Lord's developed that in you, why that's important to serve at home and everything like that.
Yeah. So I've kind of, through the years, I've learned that God has different callings in different seasons. And understanding the call in that particular season is important. And understanding every single one of the seasons that God has us in. In the time when West End first started, I was 21. Yeah. And so looking back and reflecting on that, God's love is radical. And so what's radical, and kind of speaks to what you were saying about going all the way to Peru, that it's something that's unexpected, unprecedented. God thrives in that. He uses people throughout Scripture. David, right? He could have used any of the other sons who were older than him, but he uses the unexpected, the weak, right, and instead of the strong. And so in that place, when a young person goes out there, again, Hispanic, to minister to largely African Americans, this person who doesn't speak English to preach, right? He has to learn it, right? At the same time, God uses this radical example to exemplify His love, right? And so in that season, my youth was the most important thing. I think there'll be a time when I won't be as relevant at West End. Yeah. Why? Because my youth is gone, but I will be relevant in a different sense. Yeah. Like I'll be able to mentor people. Yeah. Or I'll be able to, whatever God calls me to. But understanding that there's different times that God operates. And we were talking about seasons the other day, how we're in fall, right? And so we see this transition between summer and winter. Yeah. We also see that same thing happen in Ecclesiastes, where a lot of times we struggle in different moments. We want somebody else's season. We want what they have. We only see the leaves, right, and the fruit. That's all we see. We don't see the roots of how hard they struggled or what they're facing or where they're going. But we desire their season. But the Bible says, Solomon is writing, and he says that he made everything beautiful in its time. And so reflecting on yourself, be introspective and say, how has God made this beautiful? Because we tell ourselves different narratives, right? It's difficult, it's hard, I don't have money, I can't provide, right? All these things. But what is God's narrative? It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And I'm teaching you, and I'm growing you, and I want to speak into you. I want to raise you. I want to give you enough faith to trust me and not your own ability or your own intellect. Yeah. And so that's kind of been largely a way I've been shaped is helping understand those things. Yeah. And in that same mindset, how can I live those things out here in my own local setting? Yeah. Where is the need? where is God convicting me or calling me? Convicting me in a good way, in the conviction.
Convict, not guilt.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. So where is He leading me?
Yeah. And that's so good because being able to walk in openness in this season is able to kind of go towards like what Josue was talking about in terms of just like walking out in your faith and stepping out in faith and being able to really pursue everything that like God's planned for you.
Yeah, I literally shook my head the whole time because someone's really going to get saved listening to this. I know I've said that 3 times now, but I truly believe that. You know, we've spoken about a lot of different things, but I mean, I'm over here encouraged. That's why I'm shaking my head. You know, I'm encouraged by this, and so I'm shaking my head. So thank you, you know, for taking your time just to share all this and pour out your experiences and things that God has really given you. So I just want to thank you personally.
No, it's a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Yeah.
It's a blessing to see other believers. Again, we're all in this together, and so it's a blessing to see other people working for the kingdom.
Yeah. And we'll give you just a couple minutes just to leave everyone with just last encouragements or anything God's putting on your heart.
This is something that I've kind of been really meditating on. There's in the book of John, Corinthians, we learn about love, agape, eros, and phileo, and how it has 3 words for love. Yeah. And you might want to look this up, you know, just to verify that I'm correct. But there's also different words for life, right? There's bios, which we get biology from, you know, like the physical nature. Yeah. There's psyche, which is the mind, and then we also have zoe, which is the eternal life, the everlasting life. And in John, Zoe could be in any form of life, but in John, the way he writes, he uses it to mean this everlasting life, this kingdom life. And he says that we should operate under those premises. So he removes what we once had, which was the bios, with the flesh, like that. That's what we want, right? Like we want America first. So we want our king here, our earthly nature first, right? Yeah. Those mentalities, and I don't mean to offend anybody by saying this, but John calls us to the Zoe life. So how should we operate under that? And whenever we understand this, it all changes, right? Is my calling to reach the nations? Yeah, because we have brothers and sisters across the nations, and they too believe in the Zoe life that we're going to be a part of, everlasting. One of my favorite pastors, his name is Judah Smith, and he's out in Washington, and he posted this, and I've written it down. I want to read it for you. It says that Jesus is the only one who lived on earth after living in heaven. His life reflects having lived in eternity. So what if we lived our lives with that perspective of heaven in mind? You know, he understood and he gave it all because there was something greater, right? The Zoe life. Yeah. And that's how I desire to live my life, knowing that I am loved by God. And because of that, you know, nothing else matters.
Yeah. Well, that's a mic drop if there ever has been one.
Yeah, mic dropped.
Goodness. Well, David, definitely appreciate you, man. You've been a great friend over, it's probably been about a year now, thinking about it. Yeah. And
we go way back.
Yeah. I mean, you and my mentor, Jaron, go way back. That's
true. Shout out to Jaron.
Yeah. And
he was my RA at DBU.
Yeah.
He failed me a bunch of times for room check.
Come on, Jaron.
No doubt. That's savage wood.
I think I still owe him $20 for all the fees that I never paid. But
goodness. Well, we'll overlook that. I'm sure he's overlooked it at this point. But yeah, definitely thank you, like you and Crystal, for everything. Y'all been amazing. And yeah, we're gonna be linking all of David's information in the information box below, in the description box below, as well. All the information for West End to be able to, for those of y'all in the Dallas area or those of y'all who want to come serve, being able to go serve there being able to see everything God's doing there. Because God's doing some amazing things, and we're really excited to see everything that's going to be continuing to happen. As well, for y'all listening, thank y'all so much. Feel free to hit the subscribe button and leave us just a comment below. And that'll be it for today. So much love.